people sitting in this room are some of the poorest in the world. And I can tell this without even looking at your bank accounts. What I'm referring to is not a scarcity of money, but rather a scarcity of time. People today report feeling increasingly time poor, like they have too many things to do in a day and not enough time to do them. These rising feelings of time poverty can have crushing effects on our well-being, our stress, and our social relationships. In one data set that I analyzed with 2.5 million Americans, over 80% reported feeling so overwhelmed by the demands of work and life that they couldn't keep up. And these feelings of time poverty had a stronger negative effect on happiness than being unemployed. So where do these feelings of time poverty come from, and what can we do to overcome them? The most obvious explanation for these feelings of time poverty are that we simply spend more time working and completing household chores than we did in previous decades. However, there's very little evidence for this idea. The best data suggests that we actually have more time for leisure than we did in previous decades, thanks in part to a few modern miracles. Instead, time poverty is due in part to our constant connection to technology. Our iPhones, tablets, and laptops create time confetti, fragmenting our leisure into small, distractible units of free time that are easily squandered and lost. There are also psychological explanations for these feelings of time poverty. We often feel like we're going to have more time tomorrow than we do in the present. This is known as future time slack, concerns about intertemporal discounting, or what I like to call this phenomenon as is the yes, damn effect, and it works in life a little bit something like this. Ashley, can you help me move Saturday? No problem. Hey Ash, want to go to dinner on Saturday? Sure. Professor Whillans, I have a paper due Monday and would really appreciate your help Saturday. And so on, and so on, and so on. Saturday, damn, what was I thinking? When the future becomes the present, we often wish we could take back the things we said yes to. And this happens in part because human beings are basically allergic to leisure. Researchers call this idleness aversion. In fact, there's studies showing that we would rather blast ourselves with aversive white noise or shock ourselves with mild electric shocks rather than being left alone in a room without our phones and only our thoughts. We are also averse to being idle in part because of how we are taught, what we are taught to value. We are taught and incorrectly believe that money, not time, will bring us greater happiness. Even people with more than $10 million in the bank make this mistake. We know from the best empirical data that money can protect against sadness, but it can't buy joy. When our car breaks down, money provides a solution to this very specific problem. But true happiness demands our attention and our time. So I've documented a few of the psychological and structural barriers that get in the way of time affluence. We work and prioritize time or money over leisure. Our free time becomes time confetti thanks to our constant connection to technology, and we overcommit our future time, in part because we're averse to idleness and leisure. Now, I'm not going to leave on this depressing note. I am a happiness researcher, and so I devote a lot of my time to think about what are simple strategies that we can employ to have more and better time. The first strategy that I've uncovered in my research is this idea of funding time, that is giving up some of our money in order to have more and better time. I've conducted survey research with working adults living all over the world, and I found that those who spend money to have more and better time, such as by outsourcing disliked tasks to others, cooking, cleaning, report greater happiness, greater social connection, and greater meaning in life. And these results hold controlling for variables that you might otherwise expect to explain these relationships, like income, marital status, the number of people living in one's household. I've also documented the psychological mechanisms that help to explain why giving up our precious financial resources to have more and better time can promote happiness. They directly reduce these feelings of time pressure. When we allocate a financial resource that we care about strongly toward having more and better time, we feel more in control of our lives, and our time poverty is reduced as a result. And of course, spending money to have more free time gives you more free time to spend in ways that promote happiness. So in one large data set that I analyzed, I found that time-saving purchases promoted greater happiness, but only on the weekend, because people were also spending time in happier ways, such as socializing with friends and family. But it wasn't just that they were spending more time with their friends and family, they were also enjoying those interactions more. We can be truly present in the moment and really capitalize on our leisure when we're not distracted by everything that we have to do when we get back from that social event. Now, of course, all of the studies I've just presented to you are correlational, not causal. It could just be that happier people want to give up some of their financial resources to have more and better time because they have nice hobbies or more friends. So you have to run an experiment to really determine causality in the context of understanding happiness. So I've run many experiments on this question, one which I'll share right now, where we recruited a sample of working adults living in Canada to participate in a 2-week study. I did my graduate degree in Canada, so that's what we'll see on the screen is Canadian currency. And I recruited these working adults over 2 consecutive weekends. On one weekend, I gave them $40 to spend in any way that would save them free time. And on the next weekend, I gave them $40, and I told them to spend this on a material purchase for themselves. This controls for the fact that receiving money from a researcher feels pretty good. And we saw that people were kind of capitalizing on this windfall of money from this researcher named Ashley at UBC. People who were given instructions to spend money to have more free time purchased grocery deliveries. One clever participant had her neighbor's son run errands on her behalf, so she didn't have to go to the mall. Her neighbor's son did. And people in the material purchase condition bought things also that were valuable to them: wine, board games, sweaters. But the important part is that at the end of the day, people who had spent money with the intention of saving themselves free time reported greater happiness and less stress as a result. And now it isn't just about giving up some of our financial resources to have more free time. We can gain greater happiness simply by shifting our attention from focusing on work and productivity to focusing on having more and better time. So a second strategy that I found to be advantageous in my research is simply shifting our attentional mindset from money to time. Now, I've uncovered this from studying thousands of working adults in dozens of studies all over the world from varying incomes. And I find that just asking people a simple question of who they're more like can really get at people's underlying values. And you don't want to ask, what do you value most? People feel a little threatened, and maybe they're like, oh, this researcher's judging me. I don't want to say I value money, even if I do. So we present participants with vignettes that feature people who they could be like. This is one example. We gender match. And we ask, who are you most similar to? Are you more like Tina? Tina values time more than money, and she's willing to sacrifice money to have more free time. Or are you more like Maggie? Maggie values money more than time. She's willing to sacrifice time to have more money. We find that the populations in the US, Canada, are pretty relatively split down the middle with a slight preference for time, maybe surprisingly. We also find European samples have a stronger preference for time than the US and Canada, perhaps unsurprisingly. But regardless of people's demographic backgrounds, their age, how much money they make, we find over and over that people who say that they value time more than money report greater happiness in their lives. And this is driven in part by the fact that people who value time, not money, spend time in a way consistent with these values. They socialize more. And that's not just with friends and family, but with colleagues, or at events like this, they'll spend more time engaging in an audience that they've never met before, so engaging with new ideas and new people. They also spend more time committed to their communities. They work fewer hours, so they volunteer more and are more politically engaged. We also find that, again, they experience greater meaning in life, and that this value to prioritize time over money can actually predict career choices. So we tracked a group of graduating students in our most recent work over 1 to 2 years. And students who valued time more than money were more likely to make career choices for intrinsically motivated reasons, because they wanted to versus because they had to. And this predicted career satisfaction and happiness 1 to 2 years later. I've even replicated this at the national level. So in the World Values Survey, there's a question of whether respondents in individual countries value leisure or value work. Regardless of the GDP of the country, countries with higher levels of respondents who value leisure over work report greater overall happiness, and they were more protected from the negative shock of the financial recession in 2008. When a higher proportion of people in a country valued leisure over work, the well-being of those countries suffered less, regardless of the income of that country. So we see really powerful effects of prioritizing time over money on happiness, both at the individual level and at the societal level. But just like we don't necessarily exercise as much as we should, even though we know that fitness is good for health and happiness, people also tend not to value time as much as they should, even though, of course, time is our most valuable resource. So nationally representative samples that I've run, 99% say that they can easily think of something that they'd like to pay money to outsource, but only 17% actually spend money in this way in a typical month. This effect even holds among some of the world's wealthiest. So we've collected samples with thousands of millionaires all over Europe with a median net worth of between 10 and $20 million. And only 50% say they spend money with the intention of saving themselves time each and every month. So we can go back to these psychological biases that get in the way. We think we'll have more time tomorrow than we do today. We're taught to value money more than time, and we often fail to spontaneously recognize the opportunity costs of our decisions in our everyday lives. And so I've also started to discover some kind of simple interventions that we can all use, some mental gymnastics, if you will, to help us value time as much as money. Again, time is very abstract, and money is very concrete. The value of a $10,000 raise is very easy to understand, but the value of 2 weeks paid vacation might be a little bit harder. So we can help ourselves overcome future time slack by reminding ourselves that the future will just be as busy as the present. So we know how busy we are right now. Our agendas are full. Our inboxes are overflowing. We're probably not very likely to say yes to a commitment right now, today. But when we think about 6 months from now or a year from now, we often think our calendars will look a little bit more like this. So we need to remind ourselves before we say yes to something that our calendar in a year from now is going to look at least as busy as it does today. So we need to help make the future feel as busy as the present. And I've run some studies showing that this is a good strategy to use. We also, as organizational leaders, want to overcome this time as money thinking. There's been a lot of research, both my own and others, showing that organizational practices that make us think about the economic value of our time, billing, performance incentives, can lead us to think that money is the most valuable resource. And it can make us unwilling to give up some of our money to have more and better time. So in some data that I've collected, people who are paid by the hour, regardless of how much money they make, are less likely to make time-saving purchases, and also less likely to choose, the 67% is less likely to choose a cash prize or a time-saving voucher versus a cash prize in a lottery. When we're thinking about the economic value of our time, we're very willing to give up our money in order to have more free time. We also don't spontaneously recognize opportunity costs in the context of our everyday lives. Simply reminding ourselves that doing tasks we don't like or taking on work that doesn't bring us joy is coming at a direct cost to spending time in meaningful ways, like doing literally anything else, spending time with friends and family, or even working for people who value work. We see that simply reminding ourselves at the point of a decision that doing tasks that we don't like by ourselves comes at a direct cost to other things we care about can help people make better decisions. And for the very economically minded in the audience, which I know is many of you, we can even take it a step further. Instead of thinking what is the monetary value of our time, what is the monetary value of our happiness? So I like to call this concept happiness dollars, and it's the income equivalent of the happiness that you'd experience from making a time-related choice. So you can actually work out the math of if you make small decisions in your everyday lives to have more and better time, you can put this in a quantifiable metric, money, and see exactly what the impact of your changes are going to be for the dollar value of happiness. Now, I've done this at the median income of the US, so you can think to yourselves maybe in a multiplier of 10 or 100, whatever it is in the room today. And so what you can see is that simply all of the behaviors that I've been talking about in the talk, simply shifting our mindset from valuing money to time, has the happiness equivalent of making $2,200 more a year for someone who makes $50,000. Engaging in other behaviors that we know are good for happiness, taking paid vacation, savoring meals instead of checking our phone or trying to do work while we're engaging in that leisure experience. Engaging in active leisure activities like socializing, volunteering, or exercising, or outsourcing, that the cumulative benefit of these small changes that we can make to have more and better time can really pay off for happiness. And now some of you might be thinking, well, maybe I'll just outsource a little more and then have more free time to work. In my models, people who outsource their most disliked tasks and then spend that additional free time working, this actually produces a net loss in terms of happiness. So I know it can be kind of hard to wrap our minds around the idea of happiness dollars. But the broader point is that if we really truly want to be efficient with our time and prioritize happiness, we need to account for our time at least as carefully as we count for our money. So I presented both a problem and hopefully a few simple behaviorally informed strategies to help us overcome time poverty. We should shift our attentional focus from money toward time. Even in the absence of changing our behavior, this can produce greater gains in happiness. We want to savor experiences, and we want to plan for our time as carefully as our money, because our happiness and the happiness of our societies depend on it. Now, I want to leave with one saying that was made famous by Benjamin Franklin. He said that, remember, time is money. I want to suggest a slight revision. We might want to remember that money can also buy happier time. Thank you.